And we are live. All right, welcome, Becca. Excited to get to know
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for doing this. And I like to
Uh,
start the whole conversation before you even introduce yourself kind of professionally and what you do and whatnot. As a human, what is it like to be you?
what is it like to be me? I think that depends on the day. What's it like to be me? I really like to enjoy the day. I like to enjoy the moment. So really like to look at what's going on and look at what the positive side of it is. Um, but I also know that that comes from finding what your resets are, what your mental resets have to be. So I guess it would be
Okay.
how you start your day to what you do throughout your day.
Yeah. Okay. What do you mean mental resets?
Like, how did you sleep to how do you wake up? So, did you sleep well? Because that contributes to how your morning starts. And then what do you start your day with? Like, well, in the last 3 years, I've had to flop it, but I have to start my day with my journaling, some reading, some very intentional time. And then exercise plays a huge role in that reset too. Whether it's we live in an apartment, so I've got to walk the dogs, or whether it's an exercise that's an intentional workout, or I also do jujitsu, so it's going to a jujitsu mat and resetting on a jujitsu mat.
Okay. Nice. Y- Okay, we can get into that maybe more later into jiu-jitsu and things like that. That's cool. So what is it that you actually do in yeah.
What do I do? So I am a certified family life educator. So I own my own business and it is all about relationship education. And really, it's looking at the relationship that we have with our authentic self and how that translates into our relationship with others, our relationship with food, our relationship with our finances, and just the word relationship. A lot of times in our society, romantic is a lot of times the only thing that we
Yeah.
tie relationship to, and there are so many other aspects to relationship. So what I do is really that education on what relationship is and why one with yourself is important. And so that's what I do professionally, is that is what my business is all about. It's all about giving you the tools and resources to really look at how you have that authentic relationship with yourself, and then maybe how it contributes in other pockets of your life.
Okay. Interesting. Why this area of of education? Why this kind of business?
Why this kind of business? So I went to school and my bachelor's is social science background. So
Okay.
psychology, sociology, kind of the blend of those two, of how social sciences and how people interact and why our behaviors matter, why our ecosystems matter, why what we live in matters. It was just something that really caught my interest. So that's what my bachelor's is, all social sciences. And then that's where my family life education certification came from. And then my master's, I continued with education on family studies. So, how do our families contribute to who we are? And then from there, I worked for the extension, which extension, if you don't know what extension is, it's in the US, every state has a land grant university, and that land grant university is usually a research based institution. And extension is the leg of that university that takes the research to the communities in
Oh,
programmatic programming. So I did that for 6 years. And then when I got married and we decided to make a move, I decided to bring the parts that I just love and what I really have a passion about educating people on. And that's where my business started.
okay. How long have you been doing this? Like as a business?
So my business is it started in September of 2022. So I'm in my second full year of running my business. But I've been in the field for almost a decade.
Mm. Did you also work before, or did you just start your business right out of school?
So between school and starting my business, I worked for 6 years.
Right.
So I worked as an extension agent for six
Yeah,
years.
it was at the extension. Okay, so that was like a job. Okay. So what was your job at the extension? Was it educating directly or?
Yeah, yeah. So my job with Extension was a family and consumer science county extension agent. And so what that ultimately boils down to, because it is a very long title,
Oh my
is
God.
it's taking everything that's in somebody's house, from who you are as a person to your nutrition to your finances
Wow.
to your environment, and it's really giving people research based tools to living a healthier lifestyle, which is it's the same model that I've taken for my business, of giving you the research based tools to help you look at what your authentic self is.
Hmm. Okay. How does your business work these days? Do you work with people privately, like one on one? Do you have groups? Do you do speaking? Do you do like big workshops or courses?
So I do a variety of things. I do workshops and seminars. I do speaking engagements. So come and give you a presentation and talk about a concept, and then give you some of the resources and tools. I've got an online course suite that's got 4 courses in it right now, so you can go there, and they're all self-paced, and you can download the resources. Though you can access me and I can answer questions and help you. And then I've got a one-on-one course.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
go you can We can work one-on-one, kind of talk about goals, life, and then meet on a schedule that we kind of set up and talk about how we can work towards some of the goals that you're working on.
Yeah. Who is the like the perfect person that you can help the most?
So what I've discovered is the perfect person, it's really anybody in any age group. So
Hmm.
it's a lot of times people that are needing to discover or rediscover a part of themselves. So it may be that you've transitioned from like high school to out of high school, or you've transitioned from having kids at home to becoming an empty nester. So it may be that you've had a transition in your life, that you're having to rediscover a part of yourself that might have shifted or changed, or something that needs to change. So it's looking at that part. So the ideal person, it's somebody that really wants to discover who they are and look at it. Because sometimes when we're looking at what our authentic self is, we got to look at some of the hard parts and some of the parts that we might need to prune away to really, really come down to a person that we love to be with.
Okay, so it's mostly for people who are in transitions who want to go to next levels, but they've kind of transitioned somewhere, they feel kind of lost.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Somebody that's looking to transition, or looking just to really, they may not be in a transition, but they've lost who they are during a transition. So, like, either you went from being single to being married, like that transition, and figuring out who you are in that new stage, or you went from being a married couple to having a kid, that transition, because all those transitions are going to change us some. And so we constantly have to have this evaluation of what brings us to our authentic self, what brings us to having joy, even in the times that are really, really challenging.
Yeah. And even in the beginning or a little bit earlier, you referenced relationships as in not only romantic relationships, but also friendships, probably work relationships, and all kinds of family relationships, as well as the relationship to yourself. So is it specific and tailored towards relationship?
So it depends on which aspect you look at. So I have a blog, podcast, and weekly newsletter, and all those kind of go out weekly. And so the way that I have structured it is, one week we talk about relationship. And so that can be a relationship with yourself, or we might talk about a relationship with a friend or a partner. So, like, it varies with what we're talking about. But there's always a week on relationships. There's always a week on finances. So talking about what your relationship with is with finances, because our relationship with finances is established by the age of 7. So like the habits that we have by the age of 7, they're established. So if you knowing that, you're able to modify and change some that may not be good habits that you learned, or know what the good habits were. And then I do a week on nutrition. So whether that's talking about, like we've talked about the Mediterranean diet, or we've talked about what you need in different stages of life. And then I have a other topic, and that one varies. So like some weeks I talk about traveling, some weeks I talk about why having a clean bedroom is important for your sleep. Some I've talked about why an organized space helps. So it's it's always got the theme of relationship, but it's a different topic.
Mm. So really like a variety of topics, especially you
Mhm.
said some weeks is really variety, and then some weeks you have it kind of more more focused. Okay. How has that been for you in terms of engagement and traction with social media? Because here's even before you answer, here's why I ask. Because everybody's always talking about niche down, niche down, niche down, right? Focus on one specific thing and whatnot. So how have you um dealt with this side of the business?
So I don't necessarily post on Instagram, or I haven't for a few
Okay.
months. It got to be really overwhelming, and so
Okay.
I just had to take a pause on it. And I wasn't getting much traction on it, and so I paused. But I have been posting on Pinterest, and I just looked at my blog and podcast numbers, and it really doesn't seem to affect it. Like
Okay.
it's growing because it's I have a very strong belief that
Hmm.
yes, you can probably niche this down a little bit more, but
Hmm.
I believe that you've got to have a balance of your nutrition, your finances, and relationships to really, really look at who you are as a person. And
Mm.
then you've got this other topic that it changes some. Like traveling is a example that I can really look at. Like traveling is something that is really important to me. Like it's an item line in my budget, but it's not important to everybody. And where you travel isn't important to everybody. Like I like to go and explore places I've never been. I know people that are fine staying in within a 2-hour radius. So I really think that it takes knowing all those aspects to have a healthy self relationship. So I've niched it down some since I started. I really have. But I really think you need at least those three core concepts for your stool to stand right.
Mm. Yeah. I think I do agree with that, right? In terms of life, you definitely need a balance of all of those. And we definitely need better education in all of these areas. So yeah, it's definitely, and for me, it's been this journey of like niching down or getting more specific, has been a journey as well, has been tough, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, I relate to the thinking of like, well, but you need all of these topics, and it's really interesting to meet people with this more of a holistic approach as well. And well, I mean both. I've obviously talked to people who are very specific, and then I talk to some people who are very more broad. You say you kind of stepped away from Instagram and you're doing YouTube and podcast.
No, I'm doing Pinterest and my
Pinterest, Pinterest.
podcast.
Okay,
Yeah, Pinterest. So
Pinterest.
what I've learned about Pinterest is, so the way Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok are created, they're created to keep you within the app, right? And so they drive, so your content for those has to be driven within the apps. You want to keep people in and engaged within those apps. Plus, it lives for a very short time. And then, like, you can put 2 hours into something that's going to live for 30 seconds. Like that's really how those work. And so what I learned is um, Pinterest, it's a search engine. Like, think about how I don't know how much you've ever used Pinterest, but it's a search engine. It's gonna pull up a little bit. It's gonna pull up recipes, or it's gonna pull up this idea of this, or and so what it is when you put in your Pinterest posts, they actually have a very long lifetime. And Pinterest, because it's used more as a search engine, it's designed to push people out. So, like for my podcast, for instance, I started putting my podcast, like just a post of the title of my podcast with a small description and the link to that podcast. And my podcast, like views and downloads, they tripled in like 3 weeks. So like I found that, and what you create for Pinterest is different than what you create for the other ones. And so I found that I was getting a whole lot more bang for my buck and my time for creating my Pinterest. And so because I'm a one man show over here, I was putting a little more time over here just to help grow in the growth and just to grow in that aspect. And so that's what I was doing, was helping my podcast grow, helping my blog grow, which my blog has, I looked at the numbers the other day, and on average in a month it's got about 3,000 views. So for a relatively baby infant podcast and blog and business, it's all those are helping it grow better than I was having social media help me grow.
Yeah. So yeah, so you definitely found a lot of success with Pinterest. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm,
How
mm-hmm.
did you get onto Pinterest? Like, how did you kind of even discover that that's something that you can do?
I was listening to a podcast, and I was listening to a podcast, and she was talking about how Pinterest had helped her business. I mean, I've used Pinterest on and off for years. Like, I've never been big at like pinning my own boards and things like that, but I've always used it for like, because really, if you use Google or you search, it kicks it up Pinterest links sometimes. So that's the other thing it helps do, is like it helps put you into the algorithm of web searches. And so that was part of it. It was like, what's it gonna hurt? I can just put a few of these up and see what happens. And I'm still working on it. You've got to have about, you need 15 boards and 75 posts per board to really see the growth. So I'm still working on it because it's a lot of time. But in what I've put up, I've seen a lot of growth.
Mm,
But it came from a podcast I was listening to, of
gotcha.
just listening to how she had used it in her business.
Nice. For me, it's always been Facebook since 2020, and Instagram, not so good. TikTok, not so good. I did a little bit of LinkedIn. That was also not so good. But on Facebook, I mean, I also by far spent the most time on growing Facebook and creating content for Facebook and networking over there and using groups and all of this. And I definitely very much agree with the idea of just focus on mainly one platform, right? Like there's this, especially if you're like you said, one man band, right? There's no chance that you could be posting on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest, um, however many others, and being like omnipresent with your business. That's just no chance, right? So
Mm-mm.
if
Because they need
Pinterest,
different things.
they need different things as well. And even if you wanted to post the same thing, like that's gonna be a lot of mental energy just to repost the same thing to all of these platforms. It really is, and it sounds like, oh, you make one video, you just post it to all of the platforms. What's extra work this? But when you start doing it day in day out, then it's like, oh, damn, like this is actually a lot of like mental work that I have to put in here. So maybe it's not such a good idea. It sounds great from the outside, but like once you're in it, once you're doing it, it's really, really tough.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's what I found, is it just became really overwhelming, and it was like, let's just put our energy into one right now, and then we can grow
Yes.
into having some of the other ones.
Yeah, I found that sooner or later, most business owners or most especially solopreneurs, let's say, discover this that okay, well, it's not really worth it for me to try and post on all of these and nothing's really happening, so I'm just gonna choose one or choose a
Mhm.
few and I'm just
Mhm.
gonna focus more on those. Um, and there's people who either do that and start growing a little bit more on just one platform, and then there's others who just give up on all of social media and just go away. So yeah, it's awesome to hear that you found your place on Pinterest and it's worked very well for you. Really nice. So what would you say is kind of is next for you in this journey?
In this journey, it's finishing and getting those platforms like laid out, and then really I'm starting to work on speaking engagements. So coming and presenting and speaking with groups, whether it's corporate groups, whether it's like a Mother's Morning Out group, at conferences, being the keynote speaker. That's one of my big things that's next. And then I'm probably working on some like retreat ideas of taking like my 2 hour workshops and expanding them over a couple of days to really work through each step of it. So those are my two big things that are probably next.
Okay, so speaking engagements and you said a retreat.
So like having 10 people instead of just 10 people come to a workshop that's happening over like a 2 hour period, go somewhere, whether it's just in an intentional space together, to spend maybe 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 or 5 days, like somewhere, maybe a week, but spend a couple of days together of taking that 2 hour workshop, and instead of doing it in a compressed way, taking it and expanding it a little bit more, so that so like I have one workshop that has 10 concepts. And so instead of working on all 10 concepts just in a very big view, really being able to look down, and maybe if it was a 5 day retreat, every day work on two of the concepts. And then you can really absorb it in a much deeper way than just taking it as a bird eye view and then having to come down by yourself, but really working through it with me being the facilitator of working through it with individuals.
Yeah, awesome. I think those
Mhm.
are really powerful when you get to really dive deep and there's the environment is set up in a way that you make sure that the environment is kind of helping you make sure that you actually do it and start implementing these things and start making the changes. Because if you go to a 1 hour or 2 hour class, you kind of walk away and like, oh, that was great. I learned some new things and I have great notes. And then you go right back into your life, and it's like, oh, I don't even remember what I learned anymore. And you just go back into your old patterns and old habits. But if you're reinforcing it for 5 6 days over a retreat or like a long seminar or something like that, and you go somewhere else as well, it's really um, more impactful in a way. I did a few, well, I did only virtual so far, but I did these Unleash the Power Within with Tony Robbins. And
Mhm.
those are like 4 days, like 12-hour
Mhm.
days, 4 days. So you really, even though you're still at home or you're still in your hotel room or Airbnb where I did it, it was a completely different kind of vibe. So yeah, um, it does have a bigger, deeper impact for sure.
Well, it helps you really think more about it and really think more about how it can be more into your life, more challenging, more informational, and not just a dump of information. And then like you said, you really don't absorb it as well as what you can. It's like, so I teach self-defense, and it's like talking about self-defense. You can come to a 2 hour self-defense seminar, and it's going to give you some basic information, but the things that you learn in self-defense, unless you've practiced practice some of it every single day, our brains have a fight, flight, or freeze when something actually happens to us. And so, if you haven't really learned that, then you're just going to default to what your default is. And your default could be really, really good for you, or it can be really, really detrimental. That again goes back to like your habits of what developed as you were a child. A lot of what we develop, finances, relationship, our concepts there, all happens by the age of 7. So we're learning how our environments are. And so if that's what your default is, if you get attacked by somebody that's 3 times your size, well, if you've never really practiced that more than once at a 2-hour seminar, you're going to panic. You're going to freak out. Versus, I mean, I've done jujitsu now for almost 6 years, and the amount of times I've been in a really uncomfortable position that is like, well, this really sucks that I've had to work out of. It makes me a little more confident if something were to happen. Now, that you won't get injured or hurt in the situation, that's not a guarantee, but that you could get yourself to safety, there's a lot more chance if you've been on a jiu-jitsu mat even once a week for an extended period of time.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. There's like you just increase your chances so much more,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it's in the psychology, right? Like if you're used to it, then I do this a lot in the context of social anxiety, right?
Mhm.
I help
Mhm.
people with social anxiety, coach people on social anxiety, and one of the main progress like pillars is exposure therapy, right? So we get people used to getting themselves exposed to rejections and uncomfortable situations and embarrassing themselves, and then when it's just happening in normal life, it doesn't affect them anymore. And that's what
Mhm.
was my journey as well, like really stepping out there and putting myself into uncomfortable situations socially, so then normal life didn't make me anxious anymore.
Mm,
I'm
and that's part of my whole concept of sometimes it's living in that really uncomfortable space to get to the other side to understand, okay, I might be uncomfortable in these situations, but if I want to get to the other side, I got to work through why that's not that uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always about going outside of your comfort zone. I'm curious, how was the maybe change topics here a little bit. How was your experience of the transition from having a job at the extension to starting a business and becoming a business owner? How yeah, how was the transition for you there?
How was it? The transit, well, so at the same time that I started my business, we started my business, we moved states, sold a house, I got married, and we both started new jobs. So, how many things can you change at one time, right? And I left my job. So, the transition wasn't quite as easy as I would have hoped that it would have been, but the biggest thing that I lost in leaving my position as my extension is I loved my job. I absolutely loved what I did every day. The people I was in a community that I was brand new to when I started, but by the time I left, I had really built connections, and so I did tax income returns every year. Well, I was on my 6th year of doing that, and I had people that I saw every year that it became more than just helping them with their tax returns, but they they were like, "So, how's your sister doing?" or "How's this?" And so it became more relational. So, in leaving that, I left my job, and I also moved out to the middle of nowhere, and so my interaction with people every day was my mom, my dad, sometimes my husband, and maybe a few other people. If I went to jujitsu that day, it was the people that were at jujitsu. And so I went from interacting with people, and I like interacting with people all the time, every day, to hardly interacting with people, that was probably my hardest transition. And then finding people that understood what that was. Like, which my mom does. My mom has been an entrepreneur my entire life. So she's worked for herself. So like she understands, but that really doesn't make that transition much easier. It's and it's finding people. It's finding, I mean, even though I went back home, I hadn't been home in well, I had moved away 6 years ago states, but I hadn't been home since really I left for college. So I moved home after being gone for 9 years. So that things change, people change, you have different. So that I would say that it was one of my biggest challenges because of all the transitions and changes. It was something that I wanted to work towards. Like I wanted my own business. I went to college. So I went to college to go to culinary school, but I decided I didn't want to own my own restaurant just because of the hours that you have to work to have a successful restaurant. It was like I worked for somebody that owned a restaurant and kind of I was really good friends with them. And seeing the inside of that, I was like, I don't want to miss the holidays when I have a family. I don't want because that's what you have to do if you have a really successful restaurant. You work at the hours that people aren't working. That's what makes it successful. And so that kind of changed where, and so I've always wanted my own business. I remember being 7 years old, sitting at the beach of one of my dad's meetings, talking to one of the managers and telling him my whole plan for my life at 7 years old. And it included owning my own restaurant. And so, though I don't own my own restaurant today, I still own my own business and business concept. So it's been a journey to get here, and I wouldn't say it was an easy transition. And I would say that I'm finally coming around to what it looks like. But it's also the biggest thing I've learned in life is when you focus on something, it means that you also focus on it in your own life, right? So, like, focusing on what it looks like to really be your authentic self, I've really had to look at what that looks like in all of these transitions because I went from being single. So, I had been single. I broke up with the last guy I dated in 2014, and I hadn't been in a relationship since. So, I started dating my husband in 2021. So I had a 7 year gap of no relationship, being totally by myself, sustaining myself, supporting myself. So I had to learn that transition. What does it look like from going from your singlehood to being married? Which my husband's, and both of us had to go through that. Like we both liked our lives a lot. And it's not that we necessarily needed somebody else. We both decided we wanted the relationship. So that transition at the same time, the transition of leaving a career I love to being an entrepreneur and working, a lot of times you're in isolation. And for somebody that likes to talk a lot and likes people, that I think was one of my biggest challenges. Like what I discovered a few months in is if we would go sit in a coffee shop, I had a much more successful day than trying to sit in my office at my house because I was used to being in an office with people, and so even though I wasn't necessarily talking to people, it was that noise and that background noise. So I think that that's what it ties back to. In my transition, even though it wasn't easy, it was figuring out what were the things that myself needed to be successful and happy, and be able to find those positives throughout the day.
Mm. I like what you just highlighted, like be able to find those positives throughout the day and really shifting your focus because what's wrong is always available, but so is what's right. So it's really only about what you focus on. And something that I would like to highlight as well is that you said you were single for about 7 years. And when you got into a relationship, it wasn't because you were like, oh my God, I need to get into a relationship or like I'm so lonely, I don't like this. It was more so just like you were already happy with your life and you made it just a little bit better by getting into a relationship, by choosing that, right? And I think that's the only good way to get into a relationship and make it sustainable, right? And I think a big reason why the divorce rates are so high, right, is that people are getting into relationships out of lack. Like, oh my God, I feel like I'm missing something. Oh, the relationship is gonna solve this for me. But then you create problems inside the relationship, and so yeah. Well, we were actually, me and my fiance were on a podcast earlier today. Um, it's like it was the first time that we got invited as a couple to speak on a show, and so it was very interesting for um, it was an interesting conversation about specifically relationships and our story and things like that. But I think you might have a little bit of an age advantage in this sense. I'm 24, so I was single for about 4 years, maybe, maybe six, maybe five or something like that. Um, I would say I was mostly single like most of my life in the early stages because of my social anxiety, and then my I had like a 3 month relationship, and that was basically it, right? So technically, I can technically say that I'm like in the first serious relationship, and it's been working out very well. Um, and it was definitely more from a space of I already love my life, but this may make it a little bit better as well, and figuring out things together and doing all that. So
Hmm. And I think that's very much it. Is it's like so it's you. You really have to find this space. So I grew up in a household where like I have an older brother, and one of my the things that my older brother always said was in a relationship or in being friends with guys, be their friend. Just be their friend. Guys, some guys are gonna like the girl that's all over them and that, but most of the time, they're just gonna like who's a friend. Like just be their friend. So I spent most of my I did not date until the second half of my senior year in high school because I just didn't care. Like I really didn't. And even when I dated, the guy I dated, really it didn't affect my life that much. Like if he
okay,
was around, great, but like I had friends that I was gonna go hang out with. If he didn't want to get to know them, okay, I'm still going to hang out with them. Like you're welcome to come join. And then he broke up with me the week before I went to college. Such a kind thing to do, right? But so he just was like, it's too long distance, not gonna work. So it was like, okay. So I was single from that relationship for like a year and a half maybe. And then the next guy I dated, we had actually been friends before. So we were friends for about 7 years before we started dating.
wow.
And yeah. And then we started dating, and he just wasn't a good boyfriend. Not for me. We just didn't work. We just didn't work. There were things that just didn't work. He was a really good friend, but it didn't make for being in a great relationship. And I think that's sometimes where people fail to recognize, which that's the whole point of courtship and dating is to figure some of that out, to figure out what your relationships look like. And that's why our relationships should start. So when I teach from the relationship education, there's a triangle.
Mm,
And on the bottom is starting with the foundation, the getting to know each other, the do we connect? Do we have some of the same hobbies? It's okay to have some different ones, but we also got to have some similarities. It's okay to be opposite, but we got to have some similarities. Do our beliefs match? Do our values match? Do our what we want in a relationship, does it match? Does our faith match? Because if that doesn't, what I've watched is the further people get in a relationship, it's going to create disturbance somewhere. And then and then after that it gets in more into your physical, and then it gets into your sex. Well, if our triangle goes this up this way, if we start this way, that's where a lot of relationships start to fail, is because we start in the physical, and then we try to go, oh well, did our beliefs match? Ooh, they really don't here. You don't want any kids, but I want 5 kids. Well, that's not going to work. Like that's where you start getting some of that disagreements and things. And so when I broke up with the second guy I was dating, I just decided that I loved who I was. And he didn't love all the aspects of who I was. And so I was like, if you really love all of who I am, then that's fine. I can be single and happy. And that's what I did. I invested in friendships. I had a friend that was married to a military guy, and so he was gone 6 months out of the year most of the time when he was deployed. So we planned trips. She was out in California. And so instead of just coming to visit where she was, we picked different cities to go to. And so, like, I just really learned to love, or like my sister. My sister's always lived different places. She's lived in Alaska and Arizona. And so, getting to go and travel and be where she was. And so, that's what I think it is. Is like, I was asked not too long ago, how did I not feel lonely being single? And I think that's a loaded question because there were things that were like, so I bought my first house and I was by myself. And doing all of that looking by yourself, that's hard. Now, thankfully, I had an amazing realtor. And so she like really helped me figure out what I wanted and talked through it with me. But I still did it by myself, which it can be lonely. Or there are times that going to church, you would go sit, and then everybody'd be like, "Bye, see you next week," and you're like, "Y'all enjoy your lunch together. I'll just go be alone for the rest of the day." And so there are really lonely, but if you find the things that make you happy. So I went and painted. There was a painting door hangers that happened once a month. So I went and painted once a month. Um, and to me, as long as work, I didn't have a conflicting work thing. That was my commitment to myself of this is really fun, so I'm going to do that, which also takes out of your budget. And then I planned the trips to go see my friend and go see my sister. I went home a lot. I lived in a driving radius and I just went home when I wanted to. And then when I found jiu-jitsu, cuz so I started jiu-jitsu only 6 years ago. So when I found that, it became I was there every time the door was open. So I went to morning class, I went to evening class because it was my exercise, but it was also my social outlet outside of work. Because all I had had up to that point was work and work friends. And though I love my work friends that I have from Extension, like I talk to a lot of them regularly. One of my co hosts on my podcast is one of my best friends from Extension. So, like, I love those people, but I needed an outlet that was not work so my work brain could turn off. And so that's where my husband came from. We met and there was a group of us that were single. There were about 6 of us that didn't have anything to go home to at night. And so we would finish our jiu-jitsu, get changed, and then we would go sit outside and or stand outside. So like the gym that we had at the time, it was in a building and it was one of those that has two different businesses in it. So it was our jiu-jitsu gym, our 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu Perry, and then there was a Papa John's. And we would stand outside and we would get in these conversations and somebody might leave here or there, or there was one of the guys that was married and had kids. He'd go home, put his kids to bed, and then he'd come back. So they, there were these times we would stand there sometimes and go, "Oh, Papa John's just closed," which meant we had just stood there for 3 hours because we were in conversation. And so we found, I think in singlehood, you have to find what your community looks like. And you have to be okay being lonely because what I have watched in friends and in relationships is if you don't learn how to be happy with yourself, you're never going to be happy in a relationship because you're expecting this person to fill this void that if you haven't healed to loving yourself, you're not healed to be in a relationship. Now, I do believe that you can do that in a relationship of I think it takes recognition, though, of if you're in a relationship and you realize that you're really unhappy, I really think that you can start with working on yourself. Like, I think that you can evaluate it, evaluate what you need, and then once you figure out what you need, you're able to tell a partner what you need. And that's one of the things that I've really in the last that's I had to learn. I can be a very harsh, honest person. Thankfully, I married somebody that loves that about me. It's part of why he married me. But we had to learn how to say things so they didn't come across hurtful sometimes. Because your partner, a lot of times, is the person that you're most vulnerable with. And so, learning that, you have to learn to talk it. So, singlehood, I think, is a very important stage for everybody. And now, I know not everybody goes through it. You've got people that started dating when they were 15 and they got married and they're still together. But the relationships I've seen that are successful with that, they allow each other to evolve and change and have hard conversations. And they allow for not going, well, you're not the person I dated when we were 18. Well, nobody's the person that they were when they were 18.
Ah,
So you have to allow for relationship growth. So I think singlehood is important. But I don't think you can sit in singlehood going, oh, I want to date. Oh, I want to date. Oh, who's my next boyfriend? Oh, who's my next girlfriend? Who am I going to be with? I can't be by myself because if you live in that space, you're really not learning anything. It's and that's what you're like. What you said is like both me and my husband were really really happy with where we were in life. Like he had a job that he really enjoyed. He had a great boss, and I had the same thing. Like I really enjoyed my job and it was just one of those that we honestly became really good friends and we weren't gonna date. Like I was like, nah, I'm good. And then it was just like, wait a second. He came to so my parents live on the lake and he came to the lake, which for him was like a 4 hour drive. And he left a party with his friends. Like it was because it was Memorial Day. So it was everybody has the time off. Everybody gets together and has grill outs and time together and time with your friends. So he left that to drive 4 hours to spend the night and spend the day like at my parents' house, which that particular Memorial Day, I was in town, my little sister was in town, and my big brother was in town. So each of us had friends. So there were easily 50 people at my parents' house. And so he came into only knowing my brother and I, nobody else. He briefly met my parents once, just because when they came through the gym, he knew my brother because both me and my brother did jujitsu together at the same gym, and so he comes in and he gets to know, and he goes, and it's like, this guy, and somebody goes, "Are you sure y'all are more than just friends?" I'm like, "We're just friends." And then I was thinking, I'm like, but I really know this guy. Like, I know his entire past, his entire information. Like, we've had some really deep conversations. Do I really want to have to get to know somebody else who's really that interested in me? And so that's kind of where it started. And it was, yes, I have a few years on you. I'm about to turn 32. So both of us are in our
a little bit.
30s. Both of us are in our 30s, and it was one of those things of like, we really don't want to date just to date. So, like, if we're doing this with the intention of getting married. So, from the time we started dating to the time we started dating in June, got engaged in September, and got married in March. So, it was a very, okay, yeah, we're doing this. But I believe that it came from that we both really knew ourselves. We knew what we wanted. Now, I think this is where a lot of people make the mistake of marriage. You're supposed to get married, which you're engaged. So sorry if this is bad news for you, but you get married and it's supposed to be you're in this honeymoon phase. Everything's great, everything's pretty, everything's lovely. But in the first year, you're trying to figure out how to live with this new person that you've never really lived a life with. Like, even if you happen to live together before you got married, it's not this, there's something that changes when you
Mm,
get married.
okay.
So it's this whole aspect of you have to learn how to live with somebody. I mean, you know how to live with your parents and your siblings. You've lived with them most of your life. So you're learning to live with this new person. And though there are really, really great moments, there are still really hard moments of learning how to communicate with each other and how to, okay, I want I mean, we currently are living in a small apartment, which means that everything has to go back in its space. And if it doesn't, it just turns into chaos quickly, right? So it's like, okay, we both have to put things away. Like, if you don't put something away and you go to work all day, well, then I have to clean up behind you before I can start my day. Because it's just, I work from home, he works out of the home. So, like, it's just learning how to work together as a team, and it's a process to learn, and you have to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, I think it's all in the uncomfortable conversations, and
Mhm.
starting to live together was definitely a wild experience. We're also digital nomads, right? And so we travel around together and we change countries and we change apartments all the time. And so that helps in a way because we have very little stuff. So like with putting things away and all of this, and like the house doesn't have anything to get messy with except like maybe dishes and clothes and stuff, like little clothes and stuff like that. So that helps. But yeah, it was definitely a process. And sometimes I'm like, what are you doing? Yeah. Um, yeah.
Traveling around's cool, but okay, but then you're moving around. How often do y'all change places?
It really varies. So now we've been in one place for almost 6 months. We're gonna be here for like 6 months, and then we're still gonna start moving again. But before we changed like every month or every 2 months.
That's a lot of moving and
Yeah.
transition. So you're instead of being able to find this, because we're human and we like this comfortable spot. And I said, I have moved like in my lifetime like 15 times. Like, so when I moved from Alabama to Georgia the first time, my sister and brother said, "We're not moving you again for 2 years if you want our help." Because I had moved that many times recently. At the 2 year mark, I said, "Hey guys, I bought a house, I'm moving." So, but changing and moving places like that often, you're having to find what your patterns and routines are. Because you can't get into a routine when it's going to be a routine for 4 to 8 weeks and then it's going to change again. Because every apartment or place you stay, none of it's going to be the same. None of it's going to look the same. You're not
Yep.
going to have the same bathroom or kitchen or sleep, like none of it's going to be the same. It's
Yeah.
like, so we moved from living out in the middle of a lot of acreage to living in an apartment, which was not just an adjustment for us, but we've got dogs. And so instead of opening the door in the morning and they just get to run outside and be out there till they want, we have two that have lived in and out of places, but we got one that's really all he ever knew was we open the back door, he goes and he gets to run and play outside. Will go into being attached to him on a leash, he looks at you sometimes like, I don't know why you're following me this closely, human. So, like, we all have to find changes in behaviors. And so, yeah, living together and then learning how to travel and go to new places, it
It's
definitely,
wild. Yeah.
it definitely is.
It makes the relationship stronger, I believe, though. Um, yeah, but it's definitely a process, and there's a lot of uncomfortable times, uncomfortable conversations, and it gets much easier throughout. And I personally love the variety of this kind of life, of this lifestyle, because we've lived in like very nice 2 bedroom apartments with like a pool in on the rooftop, and like literally right on top of a shopping mall. So you just take the elevator, you pop out right inside of a huge shopping mall. And then we've lived in like shacks on the edge of a jungle. There's like this one little room that's yeah. So it's been definitely a variety experience for us. And like you mentioned, the routine, it always breaks. Like it doesn't matter what routine it's always different. It always breaks, and you have to always rebuild. And it's tough, but to me, it's worth it. But now here in Vietnam, I've definitely gotten more comfortable, and I'm like, I could stay probably another 6 months. I could stay a little bit longer again. I definitely do want to start moving again and go around. Um, and we're looking at places for New Year's for next year, very early next year. But yeah,
So,
we'll see how it's gonna work out.
so how do y'all have the uncomfortable conversations? Do y'all set a time and place? Do they just happen? How do you have them?
Mixed. So we set like a time and date. Um, Not every week, but this is something I told about a couple of days ago, even maybe it was yesterday or something. That there's a book called, I think it's Marriage Meetings. Not sure if you heard about it. My mentor told me about it. Um, and it talks about having this like super set time where you sit down. It's like kind of like a business meeting, but for the marriage or for the relationship. Um, so we haven't done these like very official ones. The uncomfortable conversations happen definitely kind of when they need to happen in a way. And then yeah, I wanted to definitely set something more intentional and regular, um, where we can sit and grow together more intentionally. Another thing is for us is that we also work together, right? Like we work on the same business basically. So yeah, we're very closely interconnected in all areas of life these days. Whereas work, living together, traveling together. Um, yeah. So
Which can be really cool, but also
uh,
really hard at the same time. Like there's a mix that happens. So you're talking about sitting down and having the meetings. So
yes.
I have always sat down and had a financial meeting with myself. Like looked at my finances. I've always done it based around my paycheck. So I was paid at the end of the month. So I went through my budget, made sure my budget was what it was, only spent out of my budget, tried really hard to live on the it's in my checking account, but I use my credit card and then turn around and pay my credit card off. And then as my husband had his own method, and then as we got married, I'm still the main one over our finances, and I sit down with it bi-weekly because we're paid bi-weekly, and then once a month we set it's turned into we just call it a business meeting, but we sit down, we talk about our finances, we review our calendars, and that the finances is a and so it's only about finances. It's about what we've done, where we are, what needs are, what needs he's got, so that we can put it into the budget. So like that's that many. But as for the other things, we recently went through and it's setting a specific time, setting a specific date, having the topic you're going to talk about, having ground rules of how you're going to do it. Like, that's the only way that we really have successful conversations, I believe. Of like, you both have to come to the table of, I'm not trying to one up you, I'm not trying to fight you. We're both trying to come to a solution. Here's how we're going to make sure we do that. Because like especially you're you see each other all the time, so you may get into a discussion that you've got to have a timeout. And I don't know, when I first started relationship education here in timeout, I think about the 3-year old that's being put in the chair for 3 minutes because that's how they're being disciplined, but really a timeout is allowing you. So You think about a bottle that's full of water and has glitter on it, and the glitter is settled on the bottom. If you shake it up, it becomes very, very cloudy and full of glitter. But once it settles back down, it becomes clear. Same way our brains think. If we're angry and aggravated, I don't know about you, but I like to fight to win. And that's not the most healthy thing for a relationship. So sometimes you gotta take 5 minutes to let your brain come back down so that you can have the serious discussion and let it think. So the I think that but that's also not just true in partnerships. Like it's true, and this is where you go from just romantic relationships to every relationship. It's true in a friendship. It's true in a parent-child relationship. It's true in a coworker relationship. It's true with your boss. If you're really mad at your boss and you try to walk in and talk, it's probably going to be a whole lot less successful as if you let yourself cool off. So like it's allowing yourself to have the uncomfortable conversations, making sure your brain is in the right brain space, and approaching it with a clear mind, not a foggy one.
Yeah, and s- definitely don't fight to win.
It doesn't work in
That's not a
anything.
that's not a good idea. In any situation, and definitely not in relationships, especially in close relationships. I definitely agree with that. But wow, hour went by super fast. Thank you for the conversation. It was a great, valuable chat. Do you have any closing statements or anything that you want to invite people to?
Not really. Really, the biggest thing I would say is if you want to get started on looking in that self relationship, I have a free so, building a relationship with yourself course,
Mm-hmm.
and it comes with some resources, and it comes with a video that's going to walk you through the guide. So if you just go to stackedintent.com backslash stacked intent course suite, it's the first course there, and so you can sign up, and that'll put you on my email list, so you'll get the weekly emails. And I try not to do more than one email a week. I think I'm going to do an email a week plus maybe a once a month that's like a what's happening with Becca. But I definitely don't bombard your email. It's really helpful tips that are research based. So if you just go to stackedintent.com, you can get signed up for my newsletter, and that's a great way to see what's happening in my business.
Amazing. Yeah, if you can send me the link as well, I'll tag it in the notes and in the description right after. And so yeah, that's this has been an amazing conversation. Thanks for the time. Thanks for sharing your experiences and your perspectives. And yeah, I hope we can stay in touch and touch base again in a few months, even in a few years.
Sounds good.